There are quite a few neurotics who become ill simply because they are normal as they are, and those who are sick because they could not become normal. The thought that someone might come up with the idea of cultivating normality is a terrible nightmare for such people, because their deepest need actually consists in leading an abnormal, non-standard life. Thanks to an education system that instills in us the same thinking mass media, that makes us experience the same fears, and advertising industry that makes us desire the same things, and social networks that make it easy to shame and ridicule anyone who crosses the line of the familiar, many people become conformists, but also many in our time are neurotics. Therefore, the question arises, is there a cause and effect relationship between excessive conformity, the desire not to stand out, and neurotic diseases? The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung believed that there was, and in this video, we'll examine what neurosis is and how excessive conformity makes us prone to such diseases. Neurosis is a mental disorder defined by a constant and deep level of anxiety and a general fear of life. In addition to these main symptoms, neurotic disease can also include depression, guilt, some specific phobias and fears, obsessions and compulsions, excessive worry and rumination, insomnia, irritability, or anger. Carl Jung suggested that the neurotic's fear of life is the result of a disturbed or weakened adaptation process and a painful development of the entire personality. In other words, the neurotic is a person who cannot adapt to the demands of life, whose personality, as a result, lags behind in development, and whose existence thus turns into a struggle with trifles without any relief. Although neurosis is not necessarily fatal, it slowly but surely sucks the life force out of a person. Neurosis destroys our potential, places us in the narrow confines of an ever-narrowing comfort zone, fills us with guilt for a life not lived, destroys relationships, hinders the development of skills, and damages our physical health due to the effects of chronic anxiety and depression on the body. Jung even called neurosis nothing less than the agony of the human soul in all its vast and incredible complexity. According to Jung, neurotic disease is caused by the coincidence of three conditions. Firstly, a person is faced with a challenge, a task, or a problem in an important area of life. Secondly, due to cowardice, laziness, self-doubt, or simply stupidity, a person evades the challenge instead of accepting it. If we carefully trace the history of neurosis, we often find a critical moment when some problem arose that was successfully evaded. The existence of a problem from which a person would like to evade is not in itself sufficient for the occurrence of neurosis. Rather, a third condition is necessary, namely the use of defense mechanisms in order to push the problem out of consciousness. It would be a serious mistake to confuse the existence of problems with neurosis. Between people whose own character creates problems and non-neurotics, there is a clear difference, which lies in the fact that the non-neurotic is sick because he is not aware of his problems. Common defense mechanisms include suppression of thoughts, repression of emotions, projection of one's problems onto another person, obsessive-compulsive activity aimed at distraction, self-medication to the point of numbness, or avoidance of situations that trigger awareness of one's problem. The use of defense mechanisms is paid for at the cost of increased anxiety, for as Jung wrote about one of his neurotic patients, by suppressing unpleasant thoughts, she created something like a mental vacuum, which, as is usually the case, gradually filled with anxiety. If she consciously worried about her thoughts, she would know what she lacked, and then she would not need anxiety states as a substitute for the absence of conscious suffering. Evasion and denial of life's tasks is very common these days, and this contributes to the level of neurotic diseases of epidemic proportions. Jung pointed to several factors that could explain this. First, many parents pass on their neurotic attitude towards life to their children. Children absorb the fears of life of neurotic parents and learn from an early age to evade life's problems, or as Jung explains, mental disorders of children are most often caused by the psychology of parents. And in most cases, it is better to pay attention to the incorrect attitude of parents and educators than to the psyche of the child, which in itself would function correctly if it were not disturbed by the harmful influence of parents. The second factor responsible for the high level of neuroses is the unwillingness of many young people to adequately separate from their parents as they approach adulthood. To become an adult physically, but remain a child in the soul, means to guarantee oneself neurotic diseases, or as he explains, although for a child it is a misfortune not to have parents, it is no less dangerous for him to be too closely connected with his family. Too strong an attachment to parents is a serious obstacle to his subsequent adaptation to the world, since the growing human being is not destined to remain forever a child in relation to his parents. Social forces also contribute to laziness and passivity, which lead to neurotic evasion of performing life's tasks. For example, this may be the excessive use of technologies that cause addiction, or paternalistic governments providing for needs without giving rights and hindering the cultivation of self-responsibility, diets not optimal for the body's production of energy, excessive use of psychotropic and recreational drugs, as well as a system of morality that no longer elevates the virtues of courage and self-confidence to their rightful place in the pantheon of values. Although many reasons may explain the existence of so many neurotics, for the suffering person the question is how to heal. According to Jung, the approach we should use depends on whether the problem we are evading lies in the collective external world of people, places, or things, or in the individualistic inner world of our psyche and soul. In my picture of the world, there is a huge external realm and the same huge inner realm. Between them stands a man, facing now one, now the other. Problems in the external world usually take the form of an inability to satisfy the basic requirements of social life. For example, some people find it difficult to make friends or establish intimate relationships, others cannot find a job they like or contribute to society, and some, for example, fail to develop an adequate persona, a social personality for productive interaction with other members of society. These problems are collective in nature in the sense that they represent life's challenges that all members of society must confront, and Jung called cases of neurotic disease, caused by evasion of performing these tasks, cases of atrophied collective adaptation. People suffering from this type of neurosis should become more normal in the sense of developing the basic skills necessary for successful functioning in society. Quoting one of the moments in Jung's book, Theory of Psychoanalysis, earlier, due to his illness, the patient was partially or completely outside of life. As a result, he neglected many of his duties, both in relation to social achievements and in relation to purely human tasks. He must return to the performance of these duties if he wants to become healthy again. But some people meet all the requirements of social life and achieve all the attributes of worldly success, spouse and family, satisfactory social life, good career, as well as sufficient material success, and yet become neurotics. As Jung writes, the psychotherapist is familiar with the collectively adapted person who has everything and does everything that can reasonably be required as a guarantee of health, but is still sick. The problem that these neurotics are evading is not in the external world, but in the inner world, the psyche. Such people are afraid of their individuality and therefore do not listen to the call of their conscience to develop the distinctive and unique aspects of their nature. As Jung wrote in his book, Symbols of Transformation, about one of his patients, he is unable to live his own life and find the character that belongs to him. These neurotics are too normal. They are too conformist. Their social success acts as a barrier to exploring the depths of their own psyche. But since the development of the individual aspects of our nature is as necessary as collective development, the inability to adequately distinguish ourselves from others will turn us into neurotics, or as Jung writes about this, There are a large number of people for whom the development of individuality is the main necessity, especially in such a cultural era as ours, which is literally flattened by collective norms. In my experience, there are very many for whom the development of individuality is an essential requirement. To heal, such a too conformist, too ordinary neurotic must undergo a symbolic death, letting go of a great deal of what is familiar and comfortable so that the individualistic side of his nature can manifest itself. As Jung himself put it, the fact that the highest peak of life can be expressed through the symbolism of death is a well-known fact, for any growth beyond oneself means the death of a character trait, an attitude, a choice of profession, and especially habits of thought and behavior. Much of this must be sacrificed in order to allow something new to be born. Our desire to obtain social approval must also be sacrificed, as must the comfort we receive from conformity. For, to paraphrase Jung, we must be pulled out of ourselves onto other paths that will allow our character to fully unfold. The neurotic must indeed choose the path of individual life that he has recognized as his own and continue to walk along it until an unmistakable reaction from his own unconscious tells him if he is on the wrong path. If we have spent years or decades plowing the conformist paths of normality, establishing a more individual approach to life may seem risky. We may face ridicule, disappoint others, or lose some of our social status. But as Jung writes, if you want to cure a neurosis, you must risk something. Doing something without risk will simply be without result, but remaining a neurotic is also a risk, but a risk that gives no reward. We will waste our lives, squander our potential, and be doomed to live out our days tormented by anxiety, depression, self-hatred, and guilt. And those who suffer from neurosis of too much conformity should remember that some of us simply cannot be normal by modern standards, and an abnormal existence is simply necessary to be healthy. Or as Jung writes, among neurotics there are not so few who do not need reminders of their social duties and obligations, who are born and destined rather to be bearers of new cultural ideals. They are neurotic as long as they bow before authority and renounce the freedom for which they are destined.